How do we understand irony? How do we understand sarcasm? How do we understand any indirect or non-literal use of language when somebody says one thing and means something else? How do we do that? It happens all the time, and yet it's a mystery exactly how we achieve it. That's what I want to talk about in this video. Hi everybody, I'm Bruce Lambert from HowCommunicationWorks.com. This is a channel where I teach you about communication skills so you can improve your relationships, succeed at work, be more confident, and lead a more fulfilling life. One of the most basic facts about communication is that we mean a lot more than we say. And sometimes we mean exactly the opposite of what we say. That's what irony is, or sarcasm, or sometimes jokes. But even in ordinary interaction, when we're not being ironic, when we're not being sarcastic, we communicate indirectly. That is, we say one thing and we mean something else. I'm going to give you a bunch of examples in a minute, but trust me, it happens all the time. So how could that possibly work? Isn't language kind of a code, and don't we directly translate what people get the ideas out of people's words, and that's how we get the meanings? If that's true, how do we say one thing and mean something else? How does the hearer know when the speaker doesn't mean what he or she said, but means the opposite? How does that work? That's what I want to talk about today. This basic property of communication is sometimes referred to as inference beyond the information given. This is just a fancy way of saying we mean more than we actually say, and people interpret more than they actually hear. I want to give you several examples of this, and I'm going to put some slides up on the screen for you to refer to. So the first one here, in example 1, Sanjay says, "Did you finish that report?" And Rick says, "It's on your desk." So Sanjay asks a direct question, "Did you finish your report?" Literally, the only appropriate answer to that question would be, "Yes, I did," or "No, I didn't." But instead, Rick says, "It's on your desk." But Sanjay doesn't have any difficulty understanding this. He understands that "it's on your desk" is an indirect way of saying, yes, I finished it and I put it on your desk. But how does Rick come to this? How does Sanjay make this inference? That's the mystery. In the second example, you see, it's a letter of reference. Mr. X's attendance at work was excellent and he always dressed professionally. Now the question is this a good reference or a bad reference? If this is all the letter says, this is a bad reference. Why? It doesn't say anything bad about Mr. X. It says their attendance at work was excellent and they always dress professionally. But anyone who got a reference letter like that would know this was a terrible reference letter. How do we know that? What magic is going on that allows us to figure that out? It's this inference beyond the information given, but how do we know when to do it? How do we know he's not being literally true, that his attendance was excellent and he always dressed professionally? How do we know he doesn't intend for us to infer nothing else? Here's another example in example 3. Martin says, "The report is really poorly written." And Maria says, "Bob wrote it." So again, there's an implication here. There's an inference that Martin is going to make, and Maria is pretty sure Martin's going to make it correctly. But how? By what mechanism are these inferences being made? And finally, on this slide, there's nothing. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is that even silence has meaning. So if you've ever gone home and seen your boyfriend or girlfriend or children or your spouse or whatever, and they're giving you the silent treatment, this is not meaningless, right? We make inferences. So even silence speaks. Even when people don't say something, we make inferences about it, and inferences can be drawn. So what's going on? How can even silence speak? I thought the meaning was in words, but if the meaning was only in words, then silence couldn't speak in the way it does. So meaning must exist not just in words, but elsewhere in the realm of our actions or in our inferences. The person who helped communication theorists understand how this inference beyond the information given worked was a philosopher by the name of Paul Grice. And more than 50 years ago, he wrote an article about something called the Cooperative Principle. And that helped us understand how this inference works, how we know when to take someone literally and when to look for a hidden meaning or an indirect or an implied meaning in what they say. So let's read what the cooperative principle is, and then I'll try to explain it. So he says, and this is a little bit obscure, I apologize, but this is it. Make your conversational contribution such as is required at the stage at which it occurs by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk exchange in which you are engaged. Oh, that is a mouthful. What on earth does he mean? He says that we're all assuming that when we're in an interaction, that the other person is being cooperative in this sense, and that When they appear not to be cooperative, we use their apparent non-cooperativeness to make an inference. So when someone says something that violates this, that appears to violate this principle of cooperativeness, we don't assume, oh, they're being uncooperative. No, we assume basically all the time that people are being cooperative in this communicative sense, and that when they appear to diverge from this kind of cooperativeness, it's our trigger to make an inference. We say, oh, the literal thing that they said appears to be irrelevant or untruthful, or they're saying too much, or they're not saying enough. The literal thing seems uncooperative, but I know they're being cooperative. So I have to search for another meaning that would allow me to see them as cooperative, because I know they're being cooperative. This is my bedrock assumption of human interaction, that the other person is being cooperative in this communicative sense of the word. It's very important to remember that this does not imply cooperativeness in the general sense of the word. That is, that someone will lend you their car, that someone will lend you money, that someone will help you with your homework, that someone will do your laundry for you. It doesn't mean cooperative in that sense. It means cooperative in this special, technical, philosophical, communicative sense. And this is the assumption we make about all people. And when they appear to be violating this cooperative principle, that's our cue to make inferences, to search for a hidden meaning, an implied meaning, an indirect meaning, because the surface literal meaning is not cooperative. That's the essence of the cooperative principle. So Paul Grice said the cooperative principle was made up of 4 maxims, or rules, or postulates, basic ideas. And here they are. There is the quantity maxim, which, and I've simplified them here. They're even more obscure than this, the way that Grice wrote them. But the quantity maxim says, say enough, but don't say too much. Now remember, all of these are triggers for inference. They're triggers for when we should look for a hidden, indirect, or implied meaning and ignore the surface meaning. So the quantity maxim says, say enough, but not too much. So when someone doesn't say enough, or when someone says too much, we should be triggered to look for a hidden meaning. The second is quality. The second maxim is the quality maxim. This is just be truthful. If someone is not being truthful, then we should be, appears to not be truthful, we should be triggered to look for a hidden meaning that allows them to appear cooperative in the sense of being truthful. So violations of the quality maxim make us search for a hidden meaning. Violations of the quantity maxim make us search for a hidden, implied, indirect meaning. The third maxim is the maxim of relation. This just says be relevant. So when someone appears to be irrelevant, they say something that is on the surface irrelevant, that's our trigger. Search for a hidden or indirect or implied meaning. And the fourth and final maxim is the maxim of manner, which says, be brief and orderly, do not be ambiguous or obscure. So when someone is not brief or not orderly, or someone is ambiguous or obscure, on the surface, we search for a hidden meaning. They must be trying to tell us something by being obscure, by being ambiguous. And so it's our job to use our common knowledge of the world and of the other person and make deductions like Sherlock Holmes from the evidence to figure out what their intended meaning must be, apart from their surface meaning, which was just a clue. So we always assume people are adhering to the cooperative principle and the maxims when they're communicating. And whenever they appear to violate the cooperative principle or one of its maxims, we know, we're triggered. Aha, that violates some maxim or the sense of cooperation, but I know they're being cooperative, so this must be a clue for me to search for another meaning. The intended meaning as opposed to the literal or spoken meaning or surface meaning. So I'm going to give you several examples of violations of the maxims and how they trigger our inferences. So the first one, where have you been? Out. So the question is, what inference do we draw? They're violating the maxim of quantity. They're not saying enough to be cooperative in response to this question. By saying so little, they're implying basically it's none of our business, that they don't want to tell us. And if you hear someone answer like this, it's pretty clear that's their intention. So here we have a violation of the quality maxim. Remember, the quality maxim is be truthful. So here the person A says, the doctor said she would see us promptly at 10 a.m. And person B says, sure, and the Bears will someday beat the Packers too. When you say an obvious falsehood, like the Bears will someday beat the Packers, although I think they finally did beat them last year after many years of not beating them. When someone tells a lie, they violate the maxim of quality. We know that they're being cooperative, so we look beyond the lie to what must be the underlying message, that they lied in order to trigger an inference. And so it's our job to try to search for the inference that allows them to appear cooperative. So this is an example of violations of the maxim of relation or relevance. So person A says, "Can I get a ride with you?" And person B says, "My car is not working." Well, on the surface at least, this is a very easy to see the indirect meaning here. Sometimes indirect meanings are so transparent and our ability to make these inferences happen so quickly, we don't even realize the indirectness is there. But if you look carefully, "Can I get a ride with you?" The answer should be yes or no. But person B says, "My car is not working." So that appears to be in some way an irrelevant response to a yes or no question. But using common knowledge and knowledge of the world, we can obviously see that that's a cooperative response. It's relevant because if the car is not working, then I can't give you a ride, and so on and so forth. So the violation of relevance allows us to make the correct inference and see the indirect meaning. So here's a violation of manner. So manner is don't be obscure, don't be ambiguous. And the person A says, "Where's Professor Fowler's office?" And person B says, "Latitude 39 degrees, 7 minutes, 48 seconds, longitude, etc., etc." This is an incredibly obscure answer to a simple question, so we must assume that person B doesn't want to tell us where Professor Fowler's office is irritated with us, or is trying to be funny. But they're not literally trying to tell us where Professor Fowler's office is by giving us this obscure response. The other example I often think of in terms of violations of manner is when people are fired from a company, and then especially high-profile people that are in the public eye. And the media will ask, "Why was so-and-so fired?" And instead of telling the truth, which is, they stole money from the company, they were sleeping with their employees, they were guilty of harassment, whatever, what the truth was, they say something like, "Mr. Smith was a dedicated long-term employee, and it became apparent after much deliberation that we had to go in a separate direction, though we cordially wish Mr. Smith all the best in his future endeavors." This is such an obscure, long-winded, ambiguous answer that we know that they don't really want to tell us why Mr. Smith was fired from the company. They're not going to tell us the truth. And the implication is it was a bad reason, and we're not going to embarrass him by telling you what the reason was. So there you have it, the cooperative principle. The essence of the cooperative principle is that it's this assumption that triggers us to make inferences. Now, what I haven't explained is how do we make these inferences? So the cooperative, someone can be irrelevant or appearing to tell a lie or saying too much or saying too little. And this will, via the cooperative principle, this will signal us, don't trust the literal meaning, look for an implied indirect meaning, because when they appear to be uncooperative, they're really signaling to us, hey, don't trust the literal meaning, look for the hidden meaning. That's how sarcasm works. That's how irony works. I'm going to make a separate video about sarcasm and irony, but you need to understand the cooperative principle first. And what I haven't explained is how you actually make these inferences. That, in a sense, is not all about communication. That's more generally about cognition. That is, how do we take clues and make deductions like Sherlock Holmes and figure things out by putting the pieces together? But that's what the process of inference is about. That's why, as I wrote on my blog, or I'll put a link to one of these early blogs down in the description, I tried to say communication is not as much like decoding as it's like problem solving or being a detective. What we're always trying to do is take all the clues that people give us, use those clues like Sherlock Holmes, and deduce or infer the speaker's intentions. And we do that in part by using the cooperative principle and in part by going through this process of inference and deduction from whatever evidence we have. And that evidence can include what I know about myself, what I know about the other person, what I know about the knowledge that we share, what I know about general principles of inference, what I know about common sense and the way the world works. And all those things get put together as the foundation of and basis for my being able to make inferences from these indirect statements. It's a kind of complicated topic. I hope I've made it a little bit clearer for you so you can understand it. This is one of the fundamental facts about communication. It's critical to understand this if you want to understand all forms of indirectness, including irony and sarcasm. And let's face it, there's a lot of people who actually don't get sarcasm, don't get irony. They're failing to see when people are being uncooperative, and so they're not triggered to make these inferences. But that's a subject for another video. In the meantime, if you like videos like this, please give it a like. even more importantly, I'd be so grateful if you would share this video or one of my other videos or a link to the channel with your friends on social media so we can grow this community of people who think about communication. If you like this type of material in general, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell notification so YouTube can let you know every time we upload a video. Go on over to howcommunicationworks.com and sign up for our mailing list. We'll send you a couple of emails a week, maybe letting you know when we've released a new YouTube video. And we'll also send you a free ebook about empathic communication skills. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.